Winner of the Creative Child Magazine's Book of the Year Award, Robby the Dyslexic Taxi and the Airport Adventure is the first book in the Creative Cab Company series created to encourage readers to embrace their differences and those of others while learning the values of kindness and determination. The book was written and illustrated by a mother son duo, Lynn and Jon Greenberg, who we are thrilled to have on the show today. Good morning, Lynn and Jon. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we go ahead and we start talking a little bit about Jon's journey, I have one of my good buddies here. His name is Ace, and he is a student here at Trident Academy. And Ace, is this your first year here? It's Ace's first year here, and his whole class actually did a project based off of your guys' book, which we've spoken about a little bit previously, and it was a self-reflection piece. So they kind of related themselves to Robby the Taxi, and I felt the need to have Ace on here. Not only because he's such a good-looking little guy, but I think he would really bring a lot to the show, and he actually has a couple of questions for you guys. So, Ace, why don't you go ahead and go ask your questions?
Who or what inspired you to make this
What inspired us to make this was a combination of things. There was the fact that we did this over COVID lockdown, so we had a bit of time on our hands. Some people did baking. We decided to write a book. But in this case, we decided to do this story because we felt like there wasn't enough representation of people in the neurodiverse community that had a voice in this sort of story. So, and the reason we decided to use a taxi was because story about me, I am dyslexic, and one time I went to the city and got completely lost. I did eventually find where I was trying to go, but that sort of inspired this idea of what if you had a taxi who couldn't tell left from right, and combine that with dyslexia, a bit of Disney style putting faces to vehicles, and an overall sense of wonder, and we got the book. Uh-oh.
You just hold it up there, buddy. That's awesome. That's awesome. Lynn, were you the kind of the leader of this? Were you like, hey, Jon, let's do this? Or was it more like Jon saying, Ma, I think this would be a great idea?
I think it was definitely a collaboration from the very start. Jon was home from college where he was an art major, and it's pretty hard to do art virtually. And also, I have grandchildren, and I was reading to them on FaceTime. And so we were thinking about what we could possibly do to, as Jon said, to reach a wider audience and to spend some time together and to do something fun and to speak to a community that we thought was really an important community. And so originally I was going to do the writing and Jon was going to do all the illustrations. And then we decided Jon has a voice and an opinion about dyslexia and about other neurodiverse ideas. And so we thought we'll collaborate on the whole thing. Although I cannot draw, I'm good at stick figures, maybe, and that's it. So all the beautiful artwork is his.
It's amazing. The story and the illustrations are amazing. Ace, you have another question that you would like to ask?
What are your
What are you really?
really good at?
Well,
Wow.
Jon will be humble, but he can speak to the fact that dyslexia, for him, the art is his superpower. And so Jon's superpower are his illustrations. And Jon is in school now, graduate school doing that. So Jon.
I do feel that my art is a bit of my superpower, yes, because without it, I wouldn't. And honestly, it's because I had dyslexia that I found out that I wanted to do this. So without, even though it was a hard stretch of time studying and learning and pretty much having to do things completely differently than everyone else, I found a spot that I'm really happy with. So I guess that would be my superpower, finding a place and dyslexia.
Yeah, I would say that is a superpower. What do you think? Think these are some good drawings that he did on this book? I think so too. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, they did a little self-reflection project on your story. Um, and Ace, what did you find the similar to Robby?
I've been on an airplane. I'm dyslexic and I filled my tank.
And he fills his tank. So when I was asking Ace a little bit before about what does that mean to you in terms of fill the tank, he says that he fills his belly enough to be able to learn and be ready for the day. Um, I just find it really interesting that these life lessons that y'all have throughout this book is portrayed and seen by individuals in all different ways. Because when I heard fill the tank, right, my mind goes to I'm always going to be prepared for what life is going to throw at me, and if my tank is full, I am going to be able to take on those journeys and those difficult paths to success. So I really found Ace's way of thinking about it also extremely important, right? Because if you don't eat, what happens?
You get hungry.
Yeah, and if you're hungry, you get tired when you're hungry. Oh, I get tired.
Kind of.
What about angry? Do you sometimes get a little angry? I do. It's called
Yeah, I
hangry.
really want.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I definitely think fuel is, no matter what kind of fuel it is important. Good nutrition is definitely a part of being, having a good education. So I think that's a great way to think about it.
Any other questions for them, or you think you're ready to go back to class?
All right.
All right. High five. You did an awesome job. Good job.
It was so nice meeting you. Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Ace. He's the man.
Great.
All right, so they. I'm just going to talk in general now about a little bit about the kids really enjoyed the story. I kind of showed it to the teacher, not expecting that she was going to create a whole lesson on it, but knowing the teachers that we have here at Trident Academy, I was not shocked. But they really embraced it. They're all hanging up and down our hallways, so it's really great to see.
That's
So
so
they were
wonderful.
excited to know that you were going to be on. So.
Aw.
Really wonderful. That's so sweet.
Mhm.
John went to a school where for dyslexic children or kids
Oh,
with
very
other
cool.
language-based learning issues. And we actually went back and John read to was then the current fourth grade. And the reception was so wonderful because I think they could see, wow, there's somebody who was here in my shoes and he wrote a book and he illustrated it and he was he was treated like a rock star. It was
Right.
wonderful to see, and they felt really good about seeing what could come from working hard.
Exactly, and John, you should feel like a rock star, because you are an inspiration for not just kids at your school, but all these kids that pick up this book and read this book. Because not only does the story have to deal with them, but knowing that somebody worked on it that is just like them it makes a really big difference for them. So I applaud you for that. It's really an amazing thing. But I do want to get into the book, but first, I just really want to ask you guys, some questions before all of this. So, Lynn, I'm gonna ask you a question first. When did you start noticing that John was starting to fall behind a little bit?
So John is my youngest of four, and I know all children, all people learn differently, but I was pretty sure early on, like 3 years old, that something was just not quite right. He was my only child who didn't want to sing the ABC song. He as he got a little older, could tell you every Thomas the Tank Engine their name, but not tell you that Thomas started with the letter T. And there were just, I could tell sometimes he was frustrated as he went to nursery school. Things just didn't feel right. And I knew he was smart. So I had people saying to me, yeah, he's a boy, he's not smart. And that didn't feel right to me at all. And so we started investigating. I have a good friend who's a pediatrician. I started asking questions, and back then John is in his mid-20s. So there wasn't as much of a conversation, especially in our community. There weren't the Facebook groups. and that there are now. And so I had to do a lot of digging, and the school system was not as supportive as you would hope. So I found someone to have him tested, and sure enough, he was classic dyslexic and super smart, and just needed to learn how to read differently.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So this happened when he was younger. You noticed, like 3 years old, 3, 4 years old.
3, 4 years old, and then he was tested when he was about 6.
So, John, like you, they figured out pretty early with me too. I was first or second grade when I was first tested. But my mom, just like your mom, had an inkling that, I'm actually one of four as well,
Oh,
but I'm the middle one. But she felt like something was off. And one of my teachers mentioned it to her, and she kind of started piecing it together a little bit. So, John, like you, I was diagnosed at a young age. And as I mentioned before, my mother was my biggest advocate. So Lynn, can you just talk a little bit about what types of things you had to do to advocate for John in the school setting?
uh, it was very difficult, I have to be honest, because we were so relieved that we had a name for it. I didn't know as much about dyslexia, so I had to learn a lot. And I think, John can speak to this, but he had a sense of relief, like, wow, it's not my fault. But at school, quite honestly, in his first grade class, his teacher kept saying, I don't understand, he's smart, he can memorize the story. I don't understand why he can't read it. And I'm thinking, well, if the educator here is having trouble, then I might have to look further. And the learning specialist pulled me aside and said quietly, I didn't tell you this, but I really can't address this here. And so we started to look for other places for John to learn how to read. And we found a wonderful school called the Windward School near about
Oh
45 minutes.
well, yep.
Yeah, about 45 minutes from where we lived. And we made the family decision because it would mean I'd drive him, and it's a private school, so like anything, you sort of have to make a family decision. And we did that so that I would drive John to school. We ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly because it was private. And we really, it was honestly the only choice that we thought would be the right choice for John, because we knew his dyslexia would not be addressed well in this school system.
Right, right. And John, do you kind of remember that onset of feeling a little bit different than your classmates in terms of picking things up and things like that?
Very much so. It's stuck with me for quite some time. Something like that just really
Oh yeah.
sticks around. I remembered I was frustrated and confused and didn't really know why I was quote unquote different, or I started to believe what some of the teachers were saying about me. And it was truly depressing. Uh, it wasn't until I was diagnosed that I felt some form of hope, because to finally be told that, yeah, this isn't really your fault, this is something out of your control, was quite the relief. But then we had to figure out how to get over that now, because now that we knew the answer, the problem, we needed to find a solution. And that took some time and a lot of effort, but without it, I again don't think I would be where I am today.
Right. Yeah, and it's a good point because it's really good to put a word or a face to how you're feeling, especially as a young child. You're very vulnerable to, especially what teachers say and what you're hearing teachers talk about. I can vividly remember overhearing conversations between teachers about me that I wasn't supposed to be listening to, but I was listening to, and those hurt, right? And you kind of act like they don't while it's going on, but deep down, they kind of build and they stick with you, like you said. So I really like that point. When did you feel like that light started to kind of go on for you, that you kind of felt like, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to get through this? Because for me, it took a while. I wasn't until, college, really, my freshman year of college, where I kind of said, you know what, it is what it is, and I'm just going to keep on pushing. There's light at the end of this tunnel, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there. So for me, it was a lot later in life. I mean, I knew I was always going to be okay, but I didn't always have the trust in myself that I was going to be a college graduate or I was going to go and get my master's degree or anything like that. I just knew that I could do it. I just didn't know if I had the willpower to do it until I was really in college. So for you, when did that light start to kind of tick on?
I'd say when I was able to leave the Windward School a little bit early, that's when I really started to feel like, oh, maybe this will be okay. There was nervousness because then I went to a different, more run-of-the-mill high school, and I didn't really know how it was going to be. Also, I think it was middle school and high school. I was there for less time in the middle school part, but I was there. I wasn't really certain how it would, how I'd be able to acclimate to an environment that wasn't like Windward. And so, yes, I was nervous, but I pretty quickly found that I was able to. Human beings are interesting in how fast they can get used to something. And the second I got into the middle school program there, I started to feel more and more comfortable. And by the end of the first year, I felt like I think I'll be able to get through this all right.
Yeah, and you're right. Humans do have such a great ability to adapt, right? And I think dyslexics, because of everything that we have to form to and mold ourselves into to quote unquote feel part of everybody else, I think we do even a better job at being able to kind of. I always say I'm like a chameleon, right? I can walk into any room and I may have some anxiety talking to people, but I can walk into any room and I can start a conversation with somebody, whether they have the same interests or not. And I think that goes back to trying to always quote unquote fit in or be like quote unquote the norm when I was a child that I could have a conversation with anybody. So that's a really really good point that humans do, especially in my opinion, dyslexics have a really good job, do a good job at being able to form to their surroundings. So the Windward School did a real. I know it very well. We were there for a leadership retreat over the summertime, actually this past summer. It's a beautiful school. We're actually in the lower school because I know there's two different campuses.
Yeah.
But they did a really good job, I guess, John, with your self-advocacy piece, right? Your ability to take what you learned, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and then be able to relay that to, I guess you said, your middle school teachers at a new school. Did you find that advocacy piece a difficult thing for you, or were you fully prepared to, hey, this is what I need to be successful?
It was and it wasn't. As Mom mentioned, I'm kind of humble, but in this case, quiet. So when it comes to things like this, I did have to find my voice a little bit, and Windward did help with that. But you also had to get comfortable with your own skin. Uh, and so it took some time, and it wasn't a snap and I fit in perfectly, but I did eventually get there.
And I'm guessing you eventually found your niche, right? You found your
Yes.
group. Yeah.
And I'll
So
say
what are your sorry,
mom
go ahead.
mom did help me quite a great deal with sort of feeling comfortable putting myself out there.
I think also, part of this journey is really finding your people as well. If you have family that's supportive, that's great. But it's also, if you do or if you don't, it's good to find other people in a community. And I think for me, when John went to the Windward School, I found other parents who could understand, the journey that we were on. John found a group of friends that were, obviously on the same journey, even if they took different career paths later. And everyone just sort of supported each other. And I think now, I think back on that, and without a community, it's more difficult. And I think John learned, the Windward School also helped him find his voice. You have to advocate for what you need. And John went on to say, hey, I have extra time. I need it for this test. I'm sorry if, he'd had to say a couple of times to different teachers, I'm sorry if that's hard for you, but I have earned this, I deserve it, and I need it. And I think he definitely found his voice, and obviously not always an easy task, but growing up with that confidence, I think has helped shape who he is.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big advocate of let kids be kids after school, especially coming from a Trident or a Windward. They
Yes.
need that exposure, that community feeling, that ability to find their people, right? I was, as I spoke in my last episode, I was always a big athlete. So when I went to sports after school, I found success in something. And finding that success kept me going. Because if I went from school to tutoring to coming home and doing homework, I would probably have drove myself crazy. I would not have had that outlet that I needed to feel successful um, in what I did. Because school, I don't know about you, John, I just didn't like going to school, and I did everything I could to get out of it. Um, I know we all have different journeys and we all have different paths. I didn't have the ability to go to a Windward like you had. I was in public school for my whole life. So those big classrooms, I was always able to hide in the back and then count the paragraphs till it was my turn. Escape to the bathroom was always my go-to right before it was my turn to read or do something out loud. But having the sports and having that community of people that I felt comfortable with because I was good at something really was beneficial for me in my life. Let's go ahead and let's get to the book because there's a few things in here that I found really interesting. Not a few, a lot of it, but some things that I kind of highlighted. But the first thing I want to ask you guys: did you guys think this book, writing it during COVID, was going to become such a success?
No, it started as just sort of a fun collaboration for us.
Right.
And we really didn't think it was going to be more than that. Maybe we'd show, my grandchildren, John's niece and nephew, like, maybe show a few friends. But I saw something in it that I thought would be appealing to a wider audience. And I have a friend who's a book designer, and we showed her a PDF of it, and we thought, is this something? And she's like, oh my God, this is adorable, this is great. And she helped us put it together into, the shape that it is, so without her help and input, it may not have become the success it is. And I think it's reached such a wide community. People like you have asked us to talk about it, and we've gone to schools to read. I think because it's unique, because it speaks to a community that doesn't have a lot of attention. I think, the reception has been amazing, so positive, and, really heartwarming, the stories we've heard because of it. It's opened up conversations, not just for dyslexic children and or their families, but teachers, kids who don't have dyslexia who are trying to understand it. So it's really opened up a wonderful, different kinds of conversations with different people that we really appreciate.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book, like I mentioned earlier, and I read it to my kids at home too. I have a 6 and a 2 year old at home, and my 6 year old absolutely loved it. And now she's asking questions about dyslexia for the first time ever. And I kind of explained, yeah, Daddy has dyslexia. Is Daddy any different than anybody else? And she goes, no. And I think just having those conversations, Lynn, like you just mentioned, for people that have dyslexia and don't have dyslexia is important
Yes.
because I like to say this one quote is dyslexia is not a death sentence. And a lot of times, if you're a parent and you don't really know much about it, you hear my child has dyslexia, and then your brain kind of runs wild. Is this the end all be all? How is my child going to be able to read? He's currently or she's in the third grade and she can't read. What's going to happen? But the more we know, because of books like yours, the more that we can get it out there that it's not a death sentence. It's just we need to learn the teaching techniques in order to reach these children. So I'm going to turn real quickly your book right here to page 8. And this is the page where it goes into how Robby is a great cab because he can remember his routes. He remembers where he's driving to because he's done it before. And then my mind kind of raced to, that kinesthetic learner, right? The learner that needs to do it to learn it.
Hmm.
That was me. I cannot sit in front of you and you talk to me and you expect me to remember it. That's not me. John, was this a little piece of you in here in terms of how you were a learner?
100% yes. You can tell me something 1,000 times and eventually it might sink in, but if you show me how to do it first, I'll get it in an instant.
Yeah, and I'm the same way too. And also, I got to write things down. If I don't write things down, it's gone. So my office is this is my office, but my office is filled with sticky notes all over the place. Some I probably should clean up and get organized, but I'll but I'll wait for that for another time. That's my ADHD part of me. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I had a feeling that had a little bit of you in there, John. All right, and then I'm going to turn to page 15. And this is the page where Mr. Walter, big businessman, intimidating figure in my eyes, according to this drawing, gets into Robby's taxi, and Robby's all confident because he thinks he knows where he's going. But then Mr. Walter buckles himself in and he says, "No, actually, you're going to take me to the airport." And it seems like through the drawings and the words, Robby kind of panics. Why does he panic? Because he's never been to the airport before. Because of that, change of route. John, a question for you here. When were you most uncomfortable? Do you remember a time where you just felt like Robby in terms of like, oh gosh, what am I going to do in this moment? How am I going to figure this out? Do you have any example or time of your life where you really felt that way?
Well, I mean, before I went to Windward, there was a lot of that because I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt uncomfortable in my own shoes, uncertain of what I had to do next. I knew what I was, but I didn't really know how to fix it yet. So there was a lot of anxiety there.
And this drawing is really perfect because of his face here. You see Robby's face. He's like, oh gosh, what are you asking me to do? Where am I going to go? How am I going to figure this out? And then as a dyslexic, my mind starts going, oh man, I'm starting to feel for this taxi right now because I know how that feels. I know, when a teacher would give me a project, but it didn't have the steps in which I needed to follow. It just had, this is what I want from you, and this is what your end product needs to look like. And I felt like Robby during those times. It's like, oh gosh, what are you asking me to do first? I'll do it. You just got to lay it out for me. And I think you probably learned that pretty well at the Windward School, and we do a really good job with that at Trident in terms of breaking projects down into smaller pieces so you don't feel like Robby, you don't feel overwhelmed and anxious. Oh my gosh, my teacher's asking me to write a 3-page paper with only a question. No, we're going to break that down for you. So I really like this part of the story because all dyslexics can relate to how Robby felt here. And then finally, I'm going to turn to talk about this last one here. This is page 17. Robby, during his panic, decides to calm himself down a little bit and thinks, how am I going to figure this out? What am I going to do? How am I going to get to the airport? And again, I thought, because I know you're an illustrator and you're very creative, I felt like you had a piece of you in this part too, in terms of, all right, let me look around. How am I going to figure this all out? So Robby decides to follow the airplane to get to the airport. John, is this part of you in here as well in terms of your creativeness is to find a solution with your strengths?
Well, I can't say I've ever followed a plane to get to a place, but I have had to be I have been in situations where I needed to think about how I was going to overcome them. It can be as simple as, I want to get a drink, but I don't have any more. They're out of cups at the drink station. What do I do? And you realize, oh yeah, I've been using this mug as something to hold thumbtacks. If I just take the thumbtacks out, I can then and wash and rinse it. I now have a cup. Yep. You just need to slow down and you'll be able to find a solution to things through what you have available. It might not always be the most straightforward thing, but you'll get there.
John, recently there was at his school, John was going to be a part of a gallery showing. And before the show opened for his artwork, there was a flood in the building. And all of the artwork that was his and others was ruined. And John was, obviously and rightfully so upset. And when he finally got the artwork back, he kind of looked at it, he started asking questions, and he figured out a way to salvage the pieces that had been ruined. And I honestly don't know if he didn't have the ability to think things through, figure out problems. I don't know. I think he probably would have said, meh, it's done, it's ruined, what can I do? But he spent the time and, he salvaged it. It might not have been the original, but he made use of what he could. And now he has different pieces. And so I think someone with dyslexia really taps into their strengths and tries to figure out alternate ways of approaching things. And John certainly has that wonderful ability. And I'm so proud of him, but as an artist and as a human being, it's a wonderful quality.
Yeah, that ability to kind of take a step back and process what's going on for dyslexic is really important. I tell the kids all the time is, if somebody asks you a question, don't just jump to your answer. Kind of sit back, let's process it for a second. Because I guarantee you, if you process it, your brain will resort to your strength and you'll come up with a better solution. So I always tell especially our older kids, that just don't jump to an answer. Just think about it for a second. So John, go ahead and tell us, what are you up to now?
Well, currently I'm working to get a graduate degree in fine arts, specifically painting and drawing. And that's going to be probably another 2-year process. But I've been just experimenting with what I have, and it's definitely time consuming, but I wouldn't give it up for anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I applaud you for following something that you really enjoy doing and that you love. Because I think that's also really important for dyslexic is get out of the box. You don't have to follow in anybody else's shoes. Like you both have mentioned a few times already in this episode, is we all have our strength. What is your specific strength? Go with it, and find a passion that's behind it. So I applaud you, John, for doing that, because a lot of times the unfortunately the dyslexic that find themselves older and not as successful as they want to be are the ones that are kind of on the straight and narrow path and are just doing and following what others expect them to do. We are just way too out of the box, in my opinion, to follow that straight and narrow. And I think we and our families need to understand that we need to give our learners the space to experiment and to test and to try things and fail at things, and that's okay, because eventually they will find their strength. I don't want to keep you all for too long, but as a question that I always ask my guests in the show, and I'm going to ask Lynn, you first. If you could meet and meet with a young child that is having trouble in school, what is something that you would tell them?
Well, I would tell that child to not give up hope. I would talk about John. I would now be able to show them this book, and tell them how special they are and that everyone is different. And I think honestly, if I could talk to the parents, I would say, if something doesn't feel right, don't just listen to what the educators, and I'll use that in quotations, are saying, because sometimes they don't know or they're overworked. If something doesn't feel right, mom, dad, caregiver, whoever, don't just assume that the educator is correct. Go with your gut. And it's the verbal and the nonverbal cues that your child might be giving you. Okay, they can't read, but also, maybe, John would sort of get up and walk around when he was little because he couldn't sit still. And he was it was a 2-part problem. He was frustrated and he has ADHD. So if I had just listened to what they were saying, like John's a problem, John's not smart, I would have been like, okay, well then, I'm sorry that he's a problem. But I knew that wasn't the case. And sure enough, once we addressed and found out what John needed and how he was going to use all of these things to his advantage and not see it as a problem, it really worked. So I would say to the parents, please listen to your gut and keep pursuing till you figure out a good answer for what your child needs.
Yeah, you make a really good point because you're the first one that brought up the parents, the families, coming from your point of view because you've been there and done that. It's very important for the families to, like you said, is to know your child. Take the time to know your child, both academically, socially, everything, because unfortunately, our little children, our little students don't have a voice yet. And what they're feeling and going through in school and even at home with homework, they're sometimes unable to express. So, advocates like you, Lynn, and families out there that are advocating for your children, I can't applaud you enough because without you, these younger children don't have that voice most of the and they need you more than they'll ever need you at that point of their lives because that is their launching point. That is the point of where they start to accept their differences and understand their strengths and weaknesses. And if they don't have the support at home, it's really difficult for children to continue to push even when they fail and they fail and they fail to get back up. They need that support in their corner. So I applaud you, Lynn, for that. John, what about you? What would you say to maybe even your younger self?
It's not going to be a straight road. It's not going to be easy, but if you keep your head held high and you take the time and know that there are people who will listen to you and are there to help, and the world is not out to get you, you will be able to do just fine. You will find a place for yourself. You will find yourself in places you never would have imagined. And if you just enjoy the journey, you will not regret it at all.
Yeah, it's a great point. Enjoy the journey. I haven't heard it that way. I've always said, push through the journey, get through the journey, but enjoying it is a great way to put it because you're going to have those ups and downs. You're going to hit the potholes. You're going to get a flat tire. But if you take the time to simply learn from those potholes and those lost tires, that your life at the end of this academic journey is going to be so much more enjoyable because you're going to learn so much from the ups and the downs. I actually am an advocate to saying that I've learned more from the times that I've gotten knocked down than the times that I've found success. And I talk about that with my high school kids all the time here is learn from this. I mean, so what you failed this quiz. Like, was that going to follow you for the rest of your life? Or are you going to learn maybe the way that I studied this time is not how I need to do it next? So it's just little things like that and the determination to try again. So enjoy the journey. I like that one. So I really, really appreciate your guys' insights. And I loved having both mom and son on here because we got a little bit of glimpse of what my mom was feeling with me when I was a child. If my listeners out there want to order the book, just please make sure you go ahead and check the description here. I'll have a link for there to purchase the book. I highly recommend purchasing it to read with your family over and over again because there's so many different lessons in here that you can take from this one story. So Lynn and John, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you both are very busy. John, best of luck in school. I know you're going to do great because you have that determination factor that you're going to need to be successful. So I cannot wait to hear where you go, and I would love to have you back on once you graduate, and we can share with everybody where you're going.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us. We're actually going to be writing a series, so we can let you know when that next book is out. It's going to be about ADHD, so a car with ADHD.
Right down my alley.
You bet.
I
think a lot of dyslexics. So.
Yes, you're not wrong. So yeah, please, we'd love to have you guys back on and share that as well. So again,
you.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you too. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.